When I walked into the living room that morning, I felt something shift in the air, something I couldn't quite name. That was the first thought that ran through my mind as I set down my cup of coffee on the chipped wooden table. The steam curled lazily, carrying the faint scent of cinnamon from the toast I'd burned, a small domestic mishap that somehow seemed to echo the chaos beneath my calm exterior. It was a Wednesday, an ordinary day by every measure, but somehow ordinary days always held the seeds of revelation when you weren't paying attention. I had spent most of my life quietly observing, smiling at the right moments, nodding when necessary, always keeping a careful record of who was truly sincere and who wore masks so convincingly you only saw the cracks later. But that morning, I hadn't realized just how much of that quiet observation would serve me. I'm Miranda, and at 53, I'd learned to read people like books, the subtle tightening of a jaw, the deliberate hesitation before a question, the fleeting glance that betrayed curiosity, envy, or even greed. My house was a modest one, the walls painted a pale cream that reflected the soft morning light. I liked it this way, unassuming, comfortable, safe. I had grown children, a close circle of friends, and a family that I loved in a messy, complicated way. Or at least, I thought I did. I had recently come into an inheritance, a vast one, far beyond what I had ever imagined. $95 million. My father had been a man of quiet means, shrewd in business, fiercely private about his wealth. He had always insisted I keep my own life simple, and that lesson had shaped me. When the letter arrived confirming the inheritance, I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. No fanfare, no announcement. Not yet. I wanted to see who would care about me, and who would care about the money. That morning, the subtle tension I felt came not from the letter or the money. It had been tucked away, untouched, secret, but from my family. My sister, Elaine, had come by early, ostensibly to borrow sugar, though I knew she had other motives. She had always had a keen eye for opportunity, for anything that could be leveraged to her advantage. "Morning, Mir," she said, her voice warm enough, but with that slight lift in her tone that always made me pause. Her hair was pulled back tightly, a few strands falling loose over her forehead. She always fussed over her appearance when she wanted something. "How are you today?" I smiled, pouring her a cup of coffee. "Good, Elaine. Just, taking it slow." She took the cup with a nod, her eyes scanning the kitchen, as if measuring every detail, every plate on the counter, the crumbs on the floor, perhaps even me. I let her glance. Let her wonder. That morning, I wanted to see the cracks. Our parents' home had always been a battleground for subtle competition. Not out loud, not in the explosive fights you see on television, but in the quiet measures, who called first, who remembered birthdays, who helped without complaint. Over the years, I had learned that family isn't always about love. Sometimes, it's about observation. And I had been observing for a very long time. My son, Jeremy, had called earlier that day, his voice bright and rushed. "Mom, are you doing anything tonight? Maybe we can grab dinner?" I had hesitated. Not because I didn't want to see him, but because the dynamics of my family were shifting. Jeremy had a way of trusting too easily, of seeing the world with rose-colored glasses. I had promised myself I'd protect him from the subtle poison that ambition and greed sometimes seeped into. "Dinner sounds nice," I replied, careful to keep my tone neutral. "Let's keep it simple. Just the three of us." He chuckled. "Perfect. I'll pick up some takeout." "Mom, you're the best." Hanging up the phone, I let out a slow breath. The quiet of my home enveloped me, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, the faint smell of toast and coffee lingering in the air. It was in these small, ordinary details that life's truths often hide. And then came the first clue. It was subtle, almost laughable if I had not known better. Elaine casually mentioned that she had heard I had some money coming my way. She smiled, innocently enough, but the glint in her eyes was unmistakable. My stomach tightened, not from fear, but from recognition. I had anticipated this. I had expected curiosity, hints, probing questions. What I hadn't expected was just how quickly people revealed themselves when a secret stood in the room like an unspoken challenge. "I was thinking," she began, leaning slightly over the counter, "maybe you'd like to invest in a little project I have. Just a small thing, to help out family." I nodded slowly, keeping my expression neutral. "That sounds interesting, Elaine. Tell me more sometime." Her smile widened. That subtle, predatory smile. And I knew. I knew what she was testing, what she wanted. But the money remained hidden, tucked safely in my drawer, and I let her wonder, let her test me. The rest of the day unfolded like a slow dance. Friends called with nothing more than polite chit-chat, distant relatives dropped by with feigned concern, their eyes too sharp, their questions too pointed. Every gesture, every glance, every word was a small piece of the puzzle I was piecing together. I watched them, as quietly as the morning sunlight spilled across my living room floor, revealing dust motes dancing in the air. By evening, I felt a strange mix of anticipation and melancholy. The inheritance was not just money, it was a mirror. A mirror reflecting who truly loved me for me, and who loved the idea of what I could give them. When Jeremy arrived that night, his face bright but tired from work, I hugged him tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo and the faint lingering of the office coffee he always carried. "Dinner's ready," I said softly, trying to mask the storm of thoughts swirling inside me. Over noodles and salad, the conversation was ordinary, filled with mundane details about work, the weather, small jokes. But even in this ordinary, I felt the quiet weight of observation pressing down. Every smile, every laugh, every anecdote became a piece of evidence. And that night, as I sat alone after everyone had gone home, I opened the drawer and touched the letter. $95 million. My father's legacy. My secret. And for the first time I allowed myself to smile. Not because of the money, but because of what I had learned about people. Some would come close, pretending love, pretending care. Others would step back, content to let life unfold, showing loyalty without expectation. And some would reveal themselves in ways I had only just begun to see. I made a quiet promise to myself that night. I would not announce the inheritance. Not yet. I would let the truth reveal itself slowly, naturally. The dance had begun, and I would watch. The real story, I knew, was just beginning. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand. It was Elaine again. My heart sank just a little, not from fear, but from recognition. She had already begun weaving her net, and I was just the fly caught in her gaze. "Morning, Mir," she said when I answered. Her voice was honeyed, smooth, and just a touch too eager. "I was thinking, maybe we could go out for brunch? Sisterly catch-up?" I paused. There was nothing unusual about brunch. Nothing unusual about her, really. But the way she said it, the subtle undercurrent of expectation, of calculation, it set my nerves on edge. I smiled, though I kept my voice calm. "Brunch sounds lovely, Elaine. But how about tomorrow? I'm a bit tied up today." Her pause was telling. A small breath, a quiet hesitation. She recovered quickly, though, When I walked into the living room that morning, I felt something shift in the air, something I couldn't quite name. That was the first thought that ran through my mind as I set down my cup of coffee on the chipped wooden table. The steam curled lazily, carrying the faint scent of cinnamon from the toast I'd burned, a small domestic mishap that somehow seemed to echo the chaos beneath my calm exterior. It was a Wednesday, an ordinary day by every measure, but somehow ordinary days always held the seeds of revelation when you weren't paying attention. I had spent most of my life quietly observing, smiling at the right moments, nodding when necessary, always keeping a careful record of who was truly sincere and who wore masks so convincingly you only saw the cracks later. But that morning, I hadn't realized just how much of that quiet observation would serve me. I'm Miranda, and at 53, I'd learned to read people like books, the subtle tightening of a jaw, the deliberate hesitation before a question, the fleeting glance that betrayed curiosity, envy, or even greed. My house was a modest one, the walls painted a pale cream that reflected the soft morning light. I liked it this way, unassuming, comfortable, safe. I had grown children, a close circle of friends, and a family that I loved in a messy, complicated way. Or at least, I thought I did. I had recently come into an inheritance, a vast one, far beyond what I had ever imagined. $95 million. My father had been a man of quiet means, shrewd in business, fiercely private about his wealth. He had always insisted I keep my own life simple, and that lesson had shaped me. When the letter arrived confirming the inheritance, I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. No fanfare, no announcement. Not yet. I wanted to see who would care about me, and who would care about the money. That morning, the subtle tension I felt came not from the letter or the money. Words ever could. So, work, she began. Anything exciting happening? I shook my head lightly. Same as usual. Just keeping busy, you know. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Of course. Keeping busy. That's good. You've always been so responsible. The word responsible lingered in the room like a suspended note. I knew what she meant by it, even if she didn't say it outright. I was responsible, reliable, cautious. In other words, predictable. And predictable could be tested. That night, after Elaine left, I sat at my desk again. The letter remained folded neatly in its envelope, a silent sentinel. I thought about my father and the lessons he had taught me, not about money, but about people. He had always said, Miranda, wealth is not about dollars. It's about truth. Wealth reveals what's already there. I realized he had been right. And I also realized that this inheritance was not just about finding out who cared. It was about understanding the very fabric of my family, the loyalty, the greed, the subtle manipulations that were often mistaken for affection. The following days brought a series of small tests, though at the time I didn't label them as such. My cousin, Felicity, stopped by, casually remarking on how successful she hoped I had become. My neighbor invited me for tea, asking innocuous questions that felt too pointed to be mere curiosity. Each interaction was like a ripple across a still pond. The water remained calm, but beneath, currents twisted and turned, revealing truths in the distortions. One afternoon, Elaine called again. Mir, I found a really promising investment. I know you'd be interested. Well, I think it could benefit both of us. I felt the first real surge of anger, not at her, but at the sheer audacity. My fingers tightened around my mug, feeling the warmth seep into my skin, calming me. I smiled, calm on the outside, but my mind was already running through a plan. We'll talk about it later, Elaine. I need to focus on a few things first. She sighed, but there was no disappointment, only calculation. She was testing me, seeing where I would bend, where I might falter. I would not. Not yet. Then came the subtle hints from Jeremy. He started asking about my future plans, what I wanted to do, if I had any large investments or opportunities on my mind. Innocent questions, but layered with curiosity. I answered vaguely, keeping my tone neutral, watching his expressions. Unlike my sister, his concern was genuine, tinged with love rather than expectation. I began to realize something that felt both heavy and liberating. The inheritance was a mirror, yes, but it was also a lens. It showed not just what people wanted, but who they truly were. And I had front row seats. By the end of the week, I had constructed a mental map of my family's loyalties, curiosities, and ambitions. Elaine hovered near the edges, always testing, always probing. My cousin stayed polite, calculating smiles hiding agendas. Jeremy, pure in his love, remained my anchor. And others, they fell somewhere in between, each interaction revealing more than the last. That night, I wrote in my journal, money does not change people. It reveals them. And I am beginning to see clearly who I can trust, and who I cannot. I closed the journal, the house quiet except for the gentle ticking of the clock and the soft rustle of the curtains in the night breeze. The inheritance waited, silent and secret, while I continued my quiet observation. I knew, deep down, that the real drama had not yet begun. I was merely at the threshold, peering into the space where greed, loyalty, and love intersected. And I was ready to watch it unfold. The first real shock came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. I had invited Jeremy over to help me with some garden work, nothing complicated, just trimming the hedges, planting a few spring flowers, but the simplicity of it made the eventual revelation sting even more sharply. We were kneeling in the soft dirt, the smell of damp earth mixing with the faint scent of lilies from the windowsill, when my phone buzzed. It was Elaine. She sounded casual, almost too casual, like she had rehearsed her words. "Miranda, I was just in the neighborhood. Thought I'd stop by." "You home?" I hesitated. The garden was exposed, she would see me outside immediately. But I wanted to see her, to watch the way she carried herself, how she measured me without knowing I was fully aware. "Yes, come in," I said. She arrived minutes later, wearing her usual polished attire, the heels clicking softly against the pavement as she approached. She smiled, the kind of smile that seemed warm but carried an invisible weight. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, her voice light. "Not at all," I replied, handing her a glass of iced tea. "Jeremy and I were just finishing up." She nodded toward him, her eyes flickering in a way that made me notice her too quickly assessing him. Not out of genuine interest, I realized, but out of calculation. He was, after all, my anchor, the one person in the family whose loyalty had never wavered. Conversation started lightly, forced at first, until she dropped the first significant clue. "You know, I've been hearing about your father's estate. Really impressive, Mir. You must be feeling relieved." I felt a chill, though I kept my smile neutral. "Yes, it's a lot to process." Her eyes sharpened just slightly, and the edges of that practiced smile tightened. She was fishing, testing. I nodded politely, then turned back to Jeremy, asking him about the roses he had planted. But Elaine wasn't done. "It must feel wonderful to finally have financial freedom. I mean, you've always been so careful with money." "I admire that." "Admire?" I thought. That word carried so much more than she intended. It carried expectation, hinting at how she imagined she might benefit. I sipped my iced tea slowly, deliberately, giving her time to reveal herself further. "You know," she said, leaning slightly closer, "if there's anything I can do to help, I'd be glad to support you in managing it. We're family, after all." There it was. I didn't need words. Her motives were laid bare, subtle yet unmistakable. She cared less about me and more about what I had. The test had begun, and she had failed, or rather, revealed herself before the real challenge had even started. That night, I sat alone in my living room, the quiet hum of the refrigerator a comforting presence. I opened the desk drawer, touching the envelope once more. $95 million, untouched, secret. And it had already done its work. People were showing themselves. Elaine, for example, had started to tilt her behavior, revealing ambition and expectation, testing boundaries. I made a decision then. I would continue to observe, but I would also prepare. I would let the inheritance sit quietly, a hidden force, while I studied how each family member navigated the subtle truths I now held. A few days later, the pattern became more evident. Elaine began leaving little notes, casual comments dropped like breadcrumbs, each one designed to draw me out, to gauge my reaction. "I heard the new art gallery is amazing. You should really see it. Maybe we could go together? Did you ever consider investing in that new restaurant downtown? I think it's exactly your style." Each suggestion seemed innocent, but in the quiet moments afterward, I could see her expectation, almost desperate, woven between the lines. I would nod, smile, even entertain the notion verbally, all while keeping my secret. All while taking mental notes. Even Jeremy began asking more pointed questions, though his curiosity came from love, not greed. "Mom, are you thinking about retiring anywhere? Doing something big, maybe something you've always wanted?" I smiled, watching him over the rim of my coffee cup. "Just enjoying the garden for now. Big decisions can wait." I found myself marveling at the contrast, the purity of his concern versus the calculation of Elaine and a few others. It struck me that money didn't create greed, it merely revealed it. And it revealed it faster than any social situation ever could. Then came the betrayal I hadn't anticipated. One evening, while checking my email, I noticed a thread forwarded from Elaine's account, mistakenly sent to me. A conversation with my cousin Felicity, discussing possible ways to guide Mir into sharing and subtly phrasing the inheritance as an opportunity for family investment. I read it twice, then sat back in my chair, the screen's glow illuminating the anger simmering inside me. I realized that this wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was strategy, manipulation, a plan to leverage my father's legacy for personal gain. I clenched my jaw, feeling the tightness spread through my chest. And for the first time, I allowed myself to think about action, not reckless, not cruel, but deliberate. Over the next week, I began subtle measures, testing each player, observing their choices without revealing my own hand. I created little opportunities for Elaine to overreach, small scenarios to see how far she would push. A conversation about a phantom investment here, a discussion about a fictional business opportunity there. Each time, her eagerness revealed itself more clearly, each interaction a confirmation that her loyalty was shallow, her interest transactional. And Jeremy? He remained constant, unshaken by my indirect games, his love and concern evident in every gesture, every question, every joke. It was comforting, grounding. A reminder that not all relationships are fragile, that some love is genuine, and untainted by expectation. By the time the weekend rolled around, I had compiled enough observation, enough insight, to take the next step. The inheritance, still safely hidden, had fulfilled its purpose so far. It had revealed hearts, motives, and the stark differences between genuine care and opportunism. That evening, as I watched the sunset spill amber light across my living room, I felt a strange sense of power. Not arrogance, not cruelty, but clarity. For the first time, I saw my family not through the lens of hope or disappointment, but through truth. The inheritance was no longer just money, it was illumination. And yet, I knew the most dramatic moments were yet to come. Elaine's next move, Jeremy's next question, the way other relatives would maneuver, all of it was building toward a revelation that would shift the family dynamic permanently. I was ready. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, the cool breeze carrying the scent of spring blooms. The quiet tension in my home was a kind of meditation. Everything was in place. The players were revealed. The game had begun. And now, I would wait, watch, and act with patience and precision. It was midweek when I noticed the first significant change in Elaine's behavior. Up until now, she had been careful, polite, even charming, keeping her intentions under a thin veil of civility. But now, the veneer was cracking. She started showing up coincidentally when I was home, lingering in doorways, asking questions about mundane things, my health, my garden, my plans for the weekend. Each inquiry seemed innocent on the surface, but I could hear the undercurrent of anticipation in her voice, the subtle hope that I would slip, that I would reveal something I had no intention of sharing. Watched her closely, as I had always done. People reveal themselves in the smallest ways, the twitch of an eyebrow, the tilt of a head, the hesitation before a word. Elaine was becoming predictable, her every move betraying expectation. And I was ready. One evening, while Jeremy was visiting, she dropped the first blatant test. "Miranda," she began, leaning slightly over the counter as I prepared tea, "I was thinking, maybe you'd consider helping me with a small project. Nothing huge, just a little support for family." I froze for a fraction of a second, letting her words hang in the air. Then I smiled, carefully measured, calm. "That sounds interesting. Why don't you tell me more tomorrow?" Her eyes flickered, a subtle flash of impatience. She wanted a yes now, or at least a reaction that revealed my hand. But I remained neutral, sipping my tea, letting the silence do the work my words could not. Jeremy watched from the sofa, unaware of the tension curling around us like smoke. He laughed at something I said, the sound pure and unguarded, and I felt a pang of warmth. He trusted me. He believed in me. Unlike Elaine, his intentions were uncomplicated. The next morning, I decided to stage a small experiment. I drafted a letter, intentionally vague, hinting at a small inheritance without specifying any amount. I left it in the hallway, knowing Elaine would see it. Sure enough, within an hour, she was at my door. "I saw your note," she said, her voice light, almost casual, but her eyes betrayed her curiosity. I wanted to make sure I understood correctly. You're in a position to invest now?" I smiled faintly, careful not to laugh. "Possibly. Or maybe it's just a step towards something new." Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the teacup I offered, the thin veneer of control slipping further. She was hooked, her interest now fully exposed. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because I was finally seeing the truth. Sadness because I realized how deeply some people's love is intertwined with expectation. Over the following week, I continued my observation. My cousin Felicity joined the dance, always polite, always cautious, trying to appear neutral while gauging what opportunities might arise. Other relatives began subtly testing me as well, offering advice, sharing concerns, and hinting at possibilities. All the while, I kept my secret, carefully noting every glance, every gesture, every question. Then came the tipping point. Elaine, emboldened by what she believed was my willingness to share, made a bold move. She suggested an investment, a small business she claimed had tremendous potential. I played along, feigning interest, asking questions, probing for details. Her excitement grew with every answer I gave, and with every detail, she revealed more than she intended, the way she imagined she could benefit, the subtle expectation that I would provide, the assumption that my money was hers for the taking. It was the perfect moment. I waited, letting her words fill the room, letting her reveal herself fully. And then I let her know, gently but firmly, that I had no intention of sharing anything, yet. "You know, Elaine," I said softly, looking her in the eyes, "I value family. But I also value honesty. And I need to see who cares about me for me, not for what I might have to offer." The realization hit her instantly. Her shoulders stiffened, her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, I saw the raw truth, greed, disguised as care, stripped bare. She left soon after, polite but subdued, her previous confidence gone. I closed the door, feeling a mix of relief and melancholy. It was a lesson, not just for her, but for everyone. Wealth, I realized, is a mirror reflecting the heart, and the reflection can be hard to accept. That night, I sat by the window, watching the city lights shimmer in the distance. Jeremy called to check in, unaware of the subtle confrontation that had just occurred. I told him I had been busy, keeping my voice light. His laughter carried through the line, a reminder of the uncomplicated love that still existed in the world. The next few days were quieter. Elaine and others tread carefully, sensing a shift in dynamics, unsure how to approach me now. And I used the time to reflect, to plan, to understand the deeper currents that ran through my family. It became clear that the inheritance was not just money, it was insight. It revealed loyalties, exposed ambition, and tested genuine affection. And I realized, slowly, that my role was not to punish, but to observe, to allow the truth to emerge naturally. One evening, I found myself flipping through old family photos. The laughter frozen in those images, the smiles captured in silver and gold, reminded me of simpler times. I touched the letters of the past, tracing the edges with my fingers, feeling the weight of history and expectation. And then, I made a quiet promise to myself, I would continue to watch, to let the truth reveal itself, and when the moment was right, I would act. Not out of malice, not out of revenge, but out of clarity, of justice, of understanding. The stage was set. The players had revealed themselves. And soon, the story that had quietly begun in the corners of my home, in hushed conversations and tentative gestures, would unfold fully. The real test, I knew, was coming. Elaine's next move, my cousin's subtle strategies, and even Jeremy's unwavering love, all would converge in a moment that would show not just who. I need to focus on a few things first. She sighed, but there was no disappointment, only calculation. She was testing me, seeing where I would bend, where I might falter. I would not. Not yet. Then came the subtle hints from Jeremy. He started asking about my future plans, what I wanted to do, if I had any large investments or opportunities on my mind. Innocent questions, but layered with curiosity. I answered vaguely, keeping my tone neutral, watching his expressions. Unlike my sister, his concern was genuine, tinged with love rather than expectation. I began to realize something that felt both heavy and liberating. The inheritance was a mirror, yes, but it was also a lens. It showed not just what people wanted, but who they truly were. And I had front row seats. By the end of the week, I had constructed a mental map of my family's loyalties, curiosities, and ambitions. Elaine hovered near the edges, always testing, always probing. My cousin stayed polite, calculating smiles hiding agendas. Jeremy, pure in his love, remained my anchor. And others, they fell somewhere in between, each interaction revealing more than the last. That night, I wrote in my journal, money does not change people. It reveals them. And I am beginning to see clearly who I can trust, and who I cannot. I closed the journal, the house quiet except for the gentle ticking of the clock and the soft rustle of the curtains in the night breeze. The inheritance waited, silent and secret, while I continued my quiet observation. I knew, deep down, that the real drama had not yet begun. I was merely at the threshold, peering into the space where greed, loyalty, and love intersected. And I was ready to watch it unfold. Reaction, something more revealing. But I remained calm. Dinner was served. Jeremy and I ate quietly, the conversation casual, warm, unguarded. Elaine hovered near the edge of the table, trying to interject, trying to shape the discussion toward topics that might expose something about my wealth. Have you thought about investing in the neighborhood? She asked casually, letting the question hang in the air, heavy with implication. I smiled, stirring my mashed potatoes slowly. I'm considering some options, yes. But I like to take my time. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She realized her subtle manipulations weren't working. She had underestimated my patience, my understanding of human nature, my ability to see beyond her words. After dinner, she lingered, hoping perhaps for another opening, another chance to sway me. But I had anticipated her moves, and I let her feel the polite barrier that had quietly grown between us. Finally, she left, her forced smile fading as the door closed behind her. It was then that I turned to Jeremy. You know, honey, I said, the aroma of coffee filling the quiet house as I poured 2 mugs, it's been an interesting few weeks. He laughed softly. Interesting how, Mom? I took a deep breath. Interesting to see people for who they really are. To watch motives surface, to notice who cares, and who expects. And to realize that sometimes, love is unconditional, and sometimes it's conditional. Jeremy nodded, sipping his coffee, his eyes thoughtful. I get it. It must be hard, though, seeing it all so clearly. It is, I admitted, staring out the window at the night sky, the streetlights casting long, quiet shadows across the lawn. But clarity is a gift. And sometimes, the hardest truths are the ones that set us free. The following week, I began to take more deliberate action. I started scheduling meetings, not for real investments, but for observation. Each conversation became a test, a way to measure loyalty, honesty, and genuine care. Elaine, predictably, pushed harder. She suggested joint projects, investment opportunities, and subtle ways in which I could help family. I entertained her ideas only to the extent that they revealed her intentions further. Each interaction was a lesson, each smile a mask, each question a probe. Then came the public consequence, though it had not yet been announced. One evening, Elaine sent a message to my cousin, Felicity, unaware that I was CC'd on the email. The tone was calculated, ambitious, planning how to approach me about the inheritance